counselor. In an environment where some counselors are being told that they must check their values at the door when they enter the profession, Senate Bill 1352 gives them the assurance that they can practice consistent with their values without fear of legal action or loss of licensure. This protection is very narrow. If you look at subsection 3, you'll see it does not suggest or require a termination of care. It does not suggest or require the termination of care. Rather, provides that a counselor may, within the context of the existing relationship, continue to encourage and support a client in the pursuit of other goals, outcomes, or behaviors that are not or do not violate the counselor's moral or ethical principles. It does not waive any existing duties to care for clients in times of crisis, but allows professionals to do so in a way that is consistent with their sincerely held moral principles. It is value neutral. It does not evaluate any particular value system over any other, but protects all counselors and therapists equally. I've been asked a few times on this to maybe give an example of what that all means. Without being sensational, I'll try to use something that would be a legitimate mainstream issue. Let's say we've got your standard overly stressed out CEO with an OCD problem, and he's being seen at a particular therapist office or counselor, and he's working through all his issues, and at some point he really feels strongly that if he were only to have an affair on his wife, things in this life would be so much better. And he's looking for that counselor that he's working with to validate, to go along with those goals, and to create the outcome that he's trying to achieve. And if you think about it, if we want our counselors and therapists to be in a box of only really caring about fulfilling what the client wants, even against what might be good for that client, I think we're asking our therapists to fit into some kind of box. In this particular scenario, this therapist could certainly work with the OCD issues or the overly stressed environment that the CEO has to work in, but can simply choose not to fulfill the goals that he's seeking to get involved in infidelity. And there may come a point where that person being counseled may say, well, this is great, but I might seek another counselor. So we're not saying that relationship has to end on either the party's side, but it could. But we're not requiring our counselors to go along with goals and outcomes that they think are going to be detrimental or not in the best service to their client. I'm sure there'll be some questions, and I'll hopefully be able to answer those. In some of the other subsections, subsection 4 clarifies that changes to professional codes of ethics, which may be hostile to the sincerely held principles of therapists, shall not be grounds for discipline. We're not going to discipline our therapists that we've given, who've been to school, who have the knowledge, they have in their heart what they believe. There's no neutrality in a relationship when it comes to counseling. There's a relationship that has to be established, and we're asking these people, based on all the time and effort they put into becoming a counselor, to create that relationship and use what makes them who they are and how they work with that particular client. We would certainly not want to lose that. In subsection 5, it provides the ability for a counselor or a therapist to access declaratory or injunctive relief if they find themselves being coerced in violation of this statute. Some of these counselors work for facilities that, will set out a standard and have them, maybe be required to do certain things against what their conscience would be, especially in this scenario that I gave you. In this way, they are protected. This bill will ensure that people of integrity feel comfortable entering into the field of counseling or therapy, knowing that Idaho's legal environment protects their right to practice in a way that is consistent with their sincerely held principles. Senate Bill 1352 will improve access to care. We talk about it in this building all the time. We are 50th out of all the states, and I think there's 50. We got a couple different things in districts of Columbia, but out of all the states, we lack per capita physicians and medical personnel to our populace. And, you know, we do have people that are choosing maybe to step out of a particular field or not step into it based on some of the things that they're having to do or being required to do. You don't have to look any further than what we experienced during COVID. I know nurses that left the field because they were not afforded a religious exemption. We lost some really, really good people. On the flip side of that, I know nurses that were never held to that standard because they became traveling nurses and were able to go around and make 3 times the money they would normally make. See how that might not be the best way to handle things. But I digress. The survey results that I have a piece of paper in front of you indicated that 9 out of 10 would rather stop practicing medicine than violate their ethical, moral, or religious beliefs. 20% of those surveyed chose to pursue a particular specialty because of experienced hostility towards their beliefs. And so often we say here in this body sometimes that it's something is a solution looking for a problem. I'm just telling you here that these are actual therapists that I've talked to that have expressed these concerns. And I don't think they're looking for a solution to a non-existent problem. It will increase transparency. Counselors will feel comfortable being transparent about their values without fear of reprisal, allowing clients to more easily find a good match. And that's what it's all about. If you're looking for a counselor, a therapist, a wedding counselor, couples counselor, you want to find a match. There's nothing about the business of counseling and providing therapy that can only take place in a textbook environment. There's a relationship that needs to be established. There needs to be trust, and that is a big part of it. To protect freedom of conscience is to improve the quality of care and increase the access to that care. And that's been a goal and will continue to be a goal of mine, to provide medical freedom for both sides of the equation, for patients and people that are working in the industry. Our right to live our lives consistent with our values and in a way that is an expression of those values is one of our most cherished rights as Americans. No Idahoan should be required to check their moral or ethical principles at the door of their profession. And in closing, I truly believe that this will provide additional care, limit the exiting from these types of professions, and will serve Idaho, its patients, and those working in this field. With that, Mr. President, the debate is open.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Wintrow.
Mr. President, to debate against the bill.
You have the floor, Senator.
Thank you. I think what we're talking about in this bill is basically providing an exception for folks in their employment to go against established ethical practices in a profession. And many professions, in fact, have codes of ethics. I was looking online to see if I could find those. Engineers, lawyers, doctors, nurses, counselors, social workers, teachers, and the list goes on. And the reason that codes of ethics are so important is because it guides practice in the profession. And in fact, as people go into training for their profession, in particular counseling, they enter into maybe schools, online, or in higher ed, and many of those are actually accredited. Here in Idaho, Boise State, Idaho State, NNU, these are accredited institutions for counseling. And accreditation is a signal to people that that school is teaching its students at the highest standards of the profession: behavior, ethics, practice, and schooling. And one of the most important things in the profession of counseling is a code of ethics. And just like the senator from 5, I spoke to counselors too, to ask their feedback on the legislation as well as their profession. And many of the people I spoke to said they were troubled by this legislation. And I asked why, because it sounds like, as the senator said, everybody has values, attitudes, beliefs, and it's very difficult to check them at the door. But what I was told repeatedly, is that counselors come to the field sometimes as a calling. They want to help people. And in that practice, as they review ethics, they deal with talking to the profession about how you can find balance with your own values as well as your clients. And I'm sure defense attorneys have to come to that balance as well. And that's a huge aspect of the training, is how you deal with your own values and ethics as opposed to your client. Now, I spoke to one counselor in particular who said she was a Christian. And she basically referred me to the code of ethics that is on the department's DOPL's website, and that's the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics for counselors. There's also one for marriage and family therapists as well. And she said, one of the first things they taught her in counseling school was this notion of ethics, because she said she was a Christian and had to balance her ethics with client ethics, especially as people were coming there with really hard topics. And the thing I found interesting in the ACA Code of Ethics, Mr. President, with permission, I'd like to read from the Code of Ethics preamble from the American College Association of Counseling.
Go ahead and read it, Senator.
Mr. President, it says so it goes through the professional values of counseling that they ascribe to. Number 1, enhancing human development throughout the lifespan. Number 2, honoring diversity, embracing a multicultural approach in support of the worth, dignity, potential, and uniqueness of the people within their social and cultural contexts. Promoting justice. Safeguarding the integrity of the counselor-client relationship, and practicing in a competent and ethical manner. They said these values provide a conceptual basic for the principles enumerated below, and these principles are the foundation for ethical behavior and decision-making. The fundamental principles of the profession are autonomy, or fostering the right to control the direction of one's life. So essential to the counseling relationship is respecting the autonomy of the client and not giving advice based on your own values, but respecting their autonomy. Number 2, non-maleficence, or avoiding action that causes harm. Beneficence, working for the good of the individual and society by promoting mental health and well-being. Justice, or treating individuals equitably and fostering fairness and equality. And these 4 right here are actually found in many helping professions in medical practice, nursing, social work. These 4 are kind of a pillar of many helping and human services professions. And counseling adds fidelity, honoring your commitments and promises, and veracity, dealing with truthfully with individuals with whom counselors come into professional contact. Now, I mention all that and important to understand that this bill is basically allowing a counselor to get off the hook if they violate their ethics. And here's how it could happen. Let's say I go in for counseling. Now, I don't know about you, but I have been to counseling. And when I went there, I didn't have a specific goal in mind or something I needed to get done. I was feeling bad. I was depressed. And in the counseling relationship, you don't just start spilling the beans in the first session, nor the second. Things start to come out 5th, 6th session. Now, if you think about, let's say a client goes to the counselor, they're feeling bad, but maybe it's session 5, it starts to come out that maybe I want a divorce. Now, if my religion says divorce is immoral, that might be a hard thing for me to swallow. Now, doesn't require that the counselor let the client go, but if it is a firmly held belief, the legislation says may release the client after establishing trust and vulnerability. Now, maybe that's okay, and maybe I'd be okay with that if the bill allowed or actually required what most other professions require, and that is a referral. So even attorneys, if they conflict out, they get you a referral. And in this case, when somebody is vulnerable and they have shared their innermost thoughts and you determine you don't want to continue counseling with them, I might be okay with this bill if it actually said, hey, let me help you find somebody in the referral process. I might be okay with that. Because what could happen is, we don't know, but let's say the person is really depressed. Let's say they leave the counselor, they feel abandoned, no matter how nice the person was, and they feel worse and worse. And what if they do harm to themselves? At that point, this bill lets you off the hook. It says you can't bring a cause of action or criminal prosecution or any disciplinary actions. So the employer, if potentially of a counseling group, can't now do anything about it. Now you're off the hook. I think that is the hardest part of this bill for me, is that there is no requirement for a referral. And as I close, the most important part about that code of ethics and respecting the autonomy of the client, not putting your values first, but putting the client's values first. When we enter that profession, that is what we do. Because we are to do no harm to the person coming in front of us. The most important thing about these ethical standards is because you're doing it alone. You're doing it behind closed doors. And so understanding that is so important, because the harm could be greater. You're not being supervised necessarily. There's no one there. So it's essential that you do have a code of ethics, that you do follow them, and you do have a disciplinary action to come if you violate them. Because the harm can be pretty detrimental when you're behind closed doors. And the other thing I do mention is, in the American Association of Christian Counselors, they actually have procedures for referrals. So there are other religious organizations, in fact, who have deeply held beliefs that actually have processes in place in their ethics for referrals. But again, I don't understand why this bill doesn't have that. Mr. President and Senators, I would ask for the no vote on this, mostly because of that. Of course, I don't want to deny anyone their values and beliefs, but this is a profession where people come for help. And there are other ways to signal to clients that your values might not align. And in this case, I think it could be very harmful to somebody coming to seek help. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Schroeder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've spoken with the sponsor from the body across the rotunda. We had a bill similar to this, I think, last year. My concerns on this are a little more narrow legal concerns. So the first concern that I have is that very frequently courts order people to obtain counseling. Alcohol counseling, drug counseling, domestic violence counseling. So a person can be placed into a counseling situation against their will because a court has ordered them to do it. So the universe of counselors in some cities is very small and is of limited availability. But a legal concern that I have now is, if I own a counseling company and I'm going to hire a counselor and I have a concern about the implementation of this bill, I'm going to be led down the path of an inquiry in hiring that's improper. Okay, before I hire you to take this caseload of domestic violence or alcohol counseling, I need to know if you're going to have any sincerely held religious beliefs that are going to cause us a problem. I don't know if we can do that. The second legal concern that I have is the civil action. So this entitles somebody, this thing is just going to generate litigation 6 ways to Sunday. Hiring an employee, disciplining an employee, a company losing a contract to provide vitally needed counseling services to the court systems. Quality counseling systems that can provide a good outcome for people that have alcohol or drug problems. The other thing is that people who have these beliefs and want to counsel people are already exempt. There's a wholesale exemption in the requirement for licensure in Idaho Code 543402. Nothing in this chapter shall be construed to apply to the activities and services of any religious denomination or sect or faith-based counseling of any kind. If you want to engage in faith-based counseling and apply your sincerely held religious beliefs, you don't even need a license. You don't even need a license. But the hazard that I see in importing a person's sincerely held ethical, moral, or religious beliefs into a counseling situation, particularly in alcohol abuse or domestic violence situations, is it's very easy for somebody's sincerely held religious beliefs to run afoul of that. Hey, I've got an idea. I want to have a job, but I have to work on insert whichever day is considered the Sabbath by a religious sect. Well, I'm sorry, I can't advise that. That goes against my sincerely held religious beliefs that people should work on the Sabbath. Hey, I can get a prescription for X, Y, or Z, or I have obtained the ability to take this counter drug. Well, that's also a narcotic, and you shouldn't take mind-altering substances because of my sincerely held religious belief. So I believe people in this situation are already protected because they're exempt from licensure to begin with. And that going in and monkeying with, as the senator from 19 said, just kind of distorts that. It creates a problem with those people's codes of ethics, and I think this is going to precipitate a ton of litigation and actually make it more difficult for people to enter the profession with the code of ethics that they need to subscribe to. And so for that reason, I'm going to be voting no. Thank you.
Is there further debate?
President.
Senator Lakey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, rise in support. Religious beliefs are something that we do hold sacred and that are something that should be protected. I also have a constituent that has been facing or has faced this issue, potential loss of licensure for failure to provide counseling in a situation that violated their sincerely held beliefs. Senators, this bill just allows that counselor to graciously and professionally acknowledge that they're not the best fit for this particular client, this particular patient. And that may or may not end the relationship. But as to that particular issue, if we're really talking about what's best for the client and what's best for the counselor, but particularly the client, we don't want to create a situation where somebody has a sincere conflict with what they're trying to counsel somebody on. Can that person really provide the best counseling to that individual if they have such a sincere conflict in that situation? So this, I think, is about providing the best counseling, the best situation for that particular client. Attorneys were mentioned. Attorneys do have a code of ethics. But as I take on a client, I have a client that comes in, I agree to represent them on a particular matter. We're going through that. If it's a criminal context, for example, I don't really do criminal law. But if I agree to represent somebody on a fraud case or something that's specific that's going forward, I represent them because I believe they're innocent. That's my personal conviction. And then they're charged with aggravated battery or DUI or something that I don't want to represent them on, I'm not the best fit for. I should be able to say that I'm not representing you on this, I'm representing you on this. And as far as the faith-based counseling, Senators, that talks about our pastors, our priests, our bishops, in providing counseling to their congregation, their members. They don't need licensure for that. But that's not a profession or a business. That's typically part of their calling or their service. They're not in the business of providing counseling. This provides that opportunity for that professional counselor, that's their business, to be able to provide the best service to their clients and let those clients that are not a good fit for them find a counselor that is the best fit for them. I'd urge your aye vote.
Mr. President. Further debate? Senator Anton,
Thank you to debate the bill.
you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Senators. I stand in support of the bill. Who sets the policy of licensure in the state of Idaho? Who determines what are the qualifications for licensure in the state of Idaho? It is the Idaho legislature. It is not some college somewhere else. It is not some professional group here and there who may not share our values. That's not who sets the policy for licensure in the state of Idaho. We set the policy. And there is no code of ethics that should require an Idahoan who's getting a professional license to abandon their religious beliefs. There is no code of ethics that should require us to somehow compromise what I think is a right under our Constitution. And the narrative I hear, maybe I'm hearing it erroneously, because I very much respect, and I've heard the senators from 8 and 19, I think they've made some great arguments, and I don't mean to discount those. But what I hear is, if you stand up for your beliefs in this profession, you're harming somebody. You're going to harm somebody by standing up for what you believe in. I don't think that's right. As a matter of fact, what I think the principle is that no one should be forced ever to choose between their faith and pursuing a profession in the state of Idaho. And we hear some of these hyperbolic examples, and they are perhaps hyperbolic, but imagine if you're a licensed counselor in the state of Idaho, and your client comes in, your patient comes in and says, I want to have a non-monogamous sexual relationship outside of my marriage, and I'm not feeling great about it. I want you to help me feel good about it. There's the specific outcome that this bill is talking about. And you don't believe in that. And your professional rules of ethics say, check your values at the door and you help them get that outcome. That's not right. And so that's why I've kind of signed on to this. I think that we have to thread the needle very carefully. I appreciate the comments that have been made. But at the end of the day, what I find with this is it's been very narrowly construed. It does not require or suggest that a counselor they have to turn away a client. It doesn't suggest that they have to necessarily lecture the client. They simply don't have to support the specific outcome that is contrary to their beliefs. Now, senators, I've heard about referrals, and we've dealt with referrals. You know, why aren't you going to force them to refer? So now you say to the counselor, okay, you don't want to counsel this person into a non-monogamous sexual relationship outside their marriage. You better find a counselor who will. We've dealt with this in the abortion arena. Are we going to force, a doctor who says, I don't want to perform an abortion to find a doctor who will perform an abortion? I say that's not right either. So I'm going to support the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President, to debate the bill.
Senator Foreman.
Thank you, Mr. President. My decision to support this bill was an easy decision to make. Our sincerely held religious beliefs should be recognized and respected in every aspect of human endeavor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. President,
Senator Hartkin.
I do need to claim a 39H. I have 2 immediate family members that are counselors, and then I would like to debate.
Senator Hartkin, your declaration under the Senate rule will be noted in the journal. Is there further debate?
Yes, I would like to debate, Mr. President.
You have the floor to debate.
Thank you. I'm only going to talk about one of my immediate family members, but she is a fully licensed, very professional Christian counselor. And she's been one for many, many years. In fact, has just retired. And she would do the referral thing because that is how her ethics were. And furthermore, when a client comes in, it is not up to the counselor to make the person feel good about what they're coming in about. It's to hear them talk and walk through their issues. They never would try to make a monogamous person or a not a monogamous person feel good about their relationship, I think they would simply walk through it with them. And I have the utmost respect for the counselors, and the people that I've heard from the most on the please vote for this are non-counselors, and the ones that sent me messages, please not vote for it, were counselors. So for that, I'm a no vote today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
Senator Rutke,
to debate against the bill.
you have the floor.
Mr. President, I'd like to reorient just for a second, because I think when it comes to professionals and their ethics, it's not really fair to say that they can't step away from the ethics that govern their daily lives, because that's not really the way professionals practice. So I'm in disagreement to the other two attorneys. I don't think we're really in disagreement. I think maybe we're just not using precise enough language about how ethics work for professionals. So you're an accountant. Maybe you have a personal belief that you shouldn't take exemptions unless they are just squarely on point. But when your client comes in to visit with you and asks, what are my options here? Your job as a professional is to lay out the options and explain those options and allow the client to make a decision. One of my law partners, and I don't think I've shared this story, but if I have, I apologize. One of my law partners' favorite stories about me was a time that we had offices that were very close to each other so we could overhear conversations on the phone. And I had to call a client to give him some thoughts on a problem he had presented to me. And so what he heard from his office was me calling the client and saying, hey, Jerry, how do you feel about suing your mother? Well, it wasn't that I felt like suing mothers was a great option for me personally. I wouldn't sue my mother. I might sue some of your mothers, but I wouldn't sue my mother. But that was the potential solution to his problem. And as a professional, it was not my job to figure those things out for him in his head. My job was to present the legal solution to his problem, and counselors have that same set of ethics that they comply with in their profession. It is a well thought out, well-founded, well-tested set of ethical obligations that they have to their clients. Now, where I think I am in agreement with the other attorneys is there are cases that I may not want to take. And as a business person, I don't have to take them. But I own my business, number one, with my partner, and he and I have these discussions. And if there is a particular case, maybe it's against a particular person, we don't have a conflict, but we may just not want to take it, either because of the subject matter or the person we'd be representing. We get together, we talk about that. That's a business decision. And we are the ones who have the names on the door. We are the ones who have responsibility for paying paychecks, providing benefits to our clients, and for keeping the place running. If I had an attorney in my office that was applying their personal set of ethics to the cases in my office, and they weren't telling the client that I'm not going to represent you because I feel this way or that way or the other, or even if they did tell him, and that client went out the door, and that client says, at Ruckty and Beck, they will not represent you if you have this type of case. Now that's a reputation issue for my firm. My employee does not have the right to do that. But under this bill, if I try to discipline that individual, not for an attorney's office, but for a counselor's office, you have to make the leap with me, you are violating the law. I can't have the discussion, I can't discipline, I can't fire, and it's my business. In a free market, we shouldn't allow that. And let's be honest about what we're talking about. This isn't about somebody coming in and saying, hey, I'm thinking about having an affair. And I actually don't think counselors would approach it with the idea that they have to give them an idea of how to have that affair. I just don't think that's the way counseling works, but I'm not a counselor, so maybe I'm wrong. But this is about people, gay people. That's what we're really talking about. People who are gay, they're struggling with it. Counselors are struggling because their religious belief says...
Senator, I think you should preface everything in your opinion.
In my...
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Otherwise, we attribute motives and...
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
How we feel about that.
In my opinion.
I just felt it was important that we acknowledge what is the issue. We have created a fiction. I'm not against creating fiction so that we can have discussions and test the outer edges of these bills. But the reality is, in my opinion, this is really a bill that allows counselors to address those sorts of concerns. Counseling people who are gay or maybe considering having an abortion, I guess, or a few other issues. I'm sure we all know what those are. I think one last concern with the bill. I did not see a requirement in here for the counselor to disclose that their sincerely held religious, moral, or ethical principles were going to affect the counseling they were going to offer. I didn't see that in the bill. And if it's in there, I'd love somebody to point it out to me. In other words, I mean, using the lawyer example again, if I had a sincerely held belief and I was not going to provide my client with their options, their legal options, if we had a similar bill for attorneys, I wouldn't have to tell them that, you know, there are 3 or 4 other options you could take advantage of, but I have selectively determined that I'm not going to disclose those to you. This allows counselors to do that. There are some other things that I really should be telling you that might help you, but I'm not going to tell you what those are, and I'm not going to tell you why I'm not going to tell you, because this law gives you the right to do that. And going back to the business owner, if you own a counseling service and that's one of your employees doing that sort of counseling where you're hiding information from your client and the client's thinking they're getting the best services and the information they need from you, that is a problem to the business owner as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Is there further debate? Senator Okonowitz.
Will the senator from 29 yield?
Senator Rutke, will you yield to a question?
Senator yields.
The senator yields.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator from 29. I looked at the bill for how it might impact an employer. I don't see anything that would prevent an employer of a clinic, say, from counseling or directing an employee, so long as they have some sort of employee agreement or an employment agreement. The only thing I saw that was prohibited was for the oversight body to punish a counselor. I believe he had mentioned something to the effect that an employer could not counsel or punish an employee if they were not behaving the way they thought they should be.
And the question is,
where in the bill does it say that an employer is prohibited from counseling?
Senator Rutke?
Thank you, Mr. President and
Senator from 3.
District 3. When I read the bill, I'm looking at line 19 through 23, where it says the declination to provide or facilitate counseling or therapy as described in subsection 1 shall not be the basis for a civil cause of action or disciplinary action pursuant to section 543407. I'm not sure whether that applies because I haven't looked up that statute, but can't be a civil cause of action. And then a civil action may be brought by if you look at lines 36 through 39 on that first page, yep, that's where it is. A civil action may be brought by a counselor or therapist for a violation of any provision of this section. Counselor or therapist shall be entitled upon the finding of violation to declare or injunctive relief and to recover the cost of the action and reasonable attorney fees. That was the section that caused me concern because I'm reading the bill for the first time here today, but it led me to think that if disciplinary action was taken against the counselor, that the counselor could be bring a civil cause of action against the employer. Now, I might be wrong about that, but that was part of the reason that I wanted to hear if there was a response to that.
To debate the bill.
Sarah O'Conowitz, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the way I read this, the section of code that was referenced, it only applies to the governing body not being able to sanction the counselor. I don't see anything in here that would prohibit or make it to where if you own a clinic, you don't have the ability to enter into an employment agreement with all of your employees as a condition of employment that says, I don't want you to be able to exercise this stuff, and if you don't want to work there, you don't have to work there. I guess to the extent that there may be any misunderstanding in the room about whether or not this ties employers' hands, I don't believe it does. So for that reason, I'll be voting yes.
Is there further debate? Hearing none,
Mr. President.
just in the nick of time.
Thank
Senator
you, Mr.
Nichols, you have the
President.
floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, just to debate the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you. So I just wanted to point out a couple of things that the ACA changed their guidelines in 2014 in regards to these parameters that we're talking about, conscious and that type of thing.
This is Obamacare she's talking
And that has
about.
created a lot of problems for
Medicaid expansion.
especially our faith-based counselors. So we need to just get back to the basics of this bill. All this bill does is it allows respect for autonomy without facilitating self-destructive behavior, because we want to promote mental health and well-being. If you look on the handout that was sent over to us, it says that 9 out of 10, it's a survey. Can I quote from this, I guess? I don't know if it's really a quote, Mr. President, but I just want to point out what was on the handout.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. If you look at number 2, it says in a survey of religious doctors, nurses, and other medical providers that 9 out of 10 would rather stop practicing medicine than violate their ethical, moral, or religious beliefs.
Yeah, who are those people?
In a state and a country right now where we have a shortage of mental health providers, I don't think we want to continue to add onto that shortage. We were talking about referrals. Referrals can be handled in many ways. It can be through doctors or insurance companies, psychologists, online, through friends and family. So I don't think we're going to have any issues with that. And in fact, 6 other states have passed similar legislation as we're looking at here. And from my own investigation, I have found nothing that has been challenged with what those states have done. This bill provides reasonable protections for our healthcare heroes, and they deserve nothing less, because who wants a doctor that isn't going to utilize a conscience? If I had a child that was, say, suffering from anorexia, I would want to take them to someone that's actually going to help them, not validate their anorexia. So I would continue to look for somebody, if that person wasn't going to provide the proper care, that would actually help my child. So I think this is a really good bill. I think this does exactly what it needs to do. And like I said, it gets back to the nuts and bolts of being able to promote mental health and well-being without sacrificing those that we are treating and those that are in our counseling and doctors and nurses occupation. So I will be supporting this bill.
Is there further debate?
You betcha.
Hearing none, Senator Bierke, you're recognized to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to say thank you to everybody who's weighed in on this. I was trying to keep track. There were some great points made on both sides. I particularly appreciate the points that back up this bill. be perfectly honest with you. I wasn't naive enough to think for a second that there wouldn't be differing of opinion on this subject. I really believe this bill is narrowly focused to provide that we are going to recognize moral and religious beliefs of our counselors. And I think that's important as we move forward to make that a paramount concern. We talk about ethics. We talk about governing bodies. My problem is that these ethics change based on what that governing body is or who they are or to what level in our system we are looking to. Personally, I like local control as much as possible.
And you're an expert.
I want Idaho counselors to be subject to what we believe those ethics should be, not a moving target, not an ever-changing, well, this year we're doing this, this year we're doing that.
It doesn't change.
Again, it's about a relationship. That
They're
referral
professionals.
component of it's really important. Do no harm.
Yeah, that's the
Do
bottom
I want to
line.
be an accomplice just because my religious or moral beliefs tell me I don't want to maybe see these goals or outcomes for this patient?
You need
so I'm
to
going
get out of that.
send them off to somebody else? You're an accomplice. You might as well have done the counseling yourself. Again, I appreciate both sides of the argument, but I decided to move forward with this bill because I really feel we need to protect our counselors and therapists in this state the way Idaho chooses. So
Idaho.
I ask for your I vote, and debate is closed.
And we have alligators around
The
the
debate is
boundaries
closed.
of
The
Idaho.
question before the Senate is, shall Senate
People
Bill
don't move here.
1352 pass the Senate? The Secretary will call the roll.
Adams, Anthony, Berndt, Bierke, Cook, Den Hartog, Foreman, Forsman, Grove, Guthrie, Harris, Hart, Harkin, Herndon, Just, Lakey, Lee.
Mr. President, 60 seconds.
Sarah Lee, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is obviously a complex bill. I want to state that my vote will be no, not because I don't appreciate religious freedom and not because I don't want to protect people's ability to do that. What this bill does, though, is you already can refer someone. You can already choose not to work with them. If you are not the expert in that area, if someone comes with an eating disorder, you can say, I don't have the expertise, go somewhere else. But what you cannot do is shame that individual on the way out after engaging in one of the most vulnerable conversations that people have. And so for that reason, I will vote no.
Bravo.
Sarah Lee votes no.
Lenny, Lind, Nichols, Okonowitz, Robbie, Ricks, Ruckty, Schroeder, Taylor.
Mr. President, 60 seconds.
Mayor Taylor, you have 60 seconds to explain your vote.
Thank you. I've really appreciated hearing all the different debate here today. I cannot support this particular bill until we can have the same type of passion towards respecting all Idahoans' personally held and sincerely held beliefs. So I'll be voting no.
Sarah Taylor votes no.
Aves, Trakel, Van Orden, Ward King, Winder, Winthrop, Seiderveld, Berndt, Harris, Lenny.
They're all monitoring the votes. They do that on the computers at their desk.
Winder,
Because the guy on the right is keeping track of the votes electronically. See, she's checking with him.
There is also a paired vote. Senator Burtonshaw votes aye. Senator Semmelroth votes nay.
The vote count shows 23 in favor with 11 against and 1 absent. A majority having voted in the affirmative, Senate Bill 1352 has passed the Senate. Hearing no correction of title, the title is approved and the bill will be transmitted to the House. Senator